this Danfoss live stream about big and small smart stores. Today, here in that live stream, we have Jamie Kitchen. Hello, Jamie. We have John Broughton here. Hi, John. Thanks for
Hi.
joining. And my name is Jorg. Unfortunately, today we do not have our colleague Jens with us. Um, he's unfortunately not able to join us.
His
But
plane left without him.
we try to do our best to go through that live stream here with you, and hopefully we can bring some interesting information. Yeah, big and small smart stores. Of course, that's supermarkets, these smart stores we talk about. And to start with, we would like to hear from you who listen to that live stream here, which kind of markets you see in your region. And in a minute or half a minute, you're gonna see something on the screen where you can decide which type of smart store or which type of store you have in general in your region, what you see, and you can have multiple choices. And just to mention that, a small convenience store, that might be something really small, or a store at a petrol station, stuff like that. A neighborhood store can be something a little bit larger, but not really that big, one or two refrigerated cabinets, maybe three, four, something like that. Then what's mentioned here as a supermarket would be the market where you have several refrigerated cabinets, normal refrigerators, as well as freezer cabinets, and of course the really, really big hypermarkets then. And to start with, please click on one of them, what you see most in your region, or on several of them, just to hear from you what you see most. We would like to hear a bit uh, from you how that looks like.
Yeah, we're going to see some regional differences here for sure.
That's what I would expect as well. Yeah. And whilst you still have the time to click a little bit here, and you see live changes on the answers here, just to let you know, please feel free to send questions to us. We are looking forward to your questions when it comes to smart stores, everything around smart stores. We would like to be able to answer your questions. First of all, we would like to hear your questions, and then hopefully we are able to answer your questions. Yeah, it's more and more answers are coming in. We leave that open for another few seconds. So please click where, well, which type of markets you have in your region mainly. And it seems that there are mainly supermarkets and then neighborhood stores, and that the hypermarkets are not really the majority of markets. Is that any surprise for you, John or Jamie?
Not for me, it's not, no.
No, no. I think if you go back some years ago, the hypermarket was the favorite. But I think as times have changed, people are doing they're shopping every day or a couple of days for the food. Whereas before, at least in the UK, I can talk from experience here, you would do your one shop, weekly shop, so you would buy all the food for the week. Now, people chop and change from smaller supermarkets, so that's not a surprise for me.
How is that for you?
Yeah, we had a couple of hypermarkets, but the situation was you had to drive, an hour or 45 minutes from where we lived to get to this place. And you saved a bit of money, but it was enormous. And the amount of time you spent there was substantial. And if you if you didn't do all your meal planning correctly and everything else, you ended up with a bunch of stuff you didn't really need half the time. But with the Walmart super centers and some other things that are going in, there's a lot of options now for supermarkets, and some of these are quite big. You might actually would have called them hypermarkets at one time, but I live in a pretty small town, so we just have two standard supermarkets in town, and then half a dozen neighborhood stores. But obviously, the further south you go, the more towards the big cities, the more supermarkets you're going to see. But yeah, supermarkets make up the vast majority of what you see in this in my area.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And let's close that question then. And yeah, a bit as expected, of course, the big hypermarkets would have been a surprise when somebody says we only have big hypermarkets. That would have been a surprise. Staying a bit here with the supermarkets, the different markets here, the different market sizes, and going to smart stores in a minute. But before we do that, let's jump to another question when we talk about supermarkets, because of course for cooling we need refrigerants. And that might be another question just out of interest again in your region. What type of refrigerants do you see in supermarkets, hypermarkets, and smaller stores? And there are different refrigerants today. And now you're going to see on the screen another question coming up. And there are different refrigerants mentioned. Either the more traditional 404A, 134A, or as somebody clicked, as it looks like, CO2. Then you can say, well, there is the lower GWP alternatives to the traditional ones like 448A, 449A, or maybe even R290, either in the whole system or in a semi-plug-in system,
Mm-hmm.
just to get an idea what you see today in your region here. And that's where we are interested in as well, and we can chat about that then later on if you like as well, just to get an idea how the distribution looks like today. And soon there will be the same question, what you expect in 3 to 5 years. But let's have a look how the distribution looks today. Let's keep that open for another half a minute so that more people can click on that and find out what refrigerants are used today. By the way, just to mention that if you want to send a question to us, we are happy to have your questions. Please type them into the chat boxes, and then we see your question.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to some of these questions, actually.
Yeah,
Yeah.
me too. And all right, again, we see a certain distribution here for A, 134A, still the majority in existing markets today. Then we see quite a bit of CO2, not yet too many, kind of nothing on the lower GWP alternatives for the traditional ones, which are still HFCs. Some others are coming up, whatever that might be. But yeah, thanks for giving us that feedback. And from my perspective, not very surprising because many markets are existing markets and they are still charged with the more traditional refrigerants. Or how do you see that, guys?
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, again, if you break it down into sizes, there's a lot of standalone coolers and freezers, merchandisers as we call them, that have an individual refrigeration cassetter pack in it, and they're generally CO2 or R, and a lot of them are R290 just because of the energy savings over, so you had your traditional R134A case, and it switched over to R290. And there's a lot of those in the smaller stores. Whereas your bigger rack systems, where you're talking, many, many, kilos of refrigerant in split systems, there's a lot of existing R404A out there. Heck, there's a lot of, I bet you under others, there's a lot of the original retrofit refrigerants that retrofitted 502 and 12 out there still. MP39 and these other refrigerants that they're still running. They haven't pulled them out. And, I bet you under the other, that makes up a lot. A gentleman here said 407A. Yes, there's some of that out there too. Um, you'd be surprised what you'd find out there.
Yeah. Thanks for all the feedback you give us here. Now I would like to jump to the but now let's assume we are in the future, 3 to 5 years from now. What is your expectation to all of those who listen to us here? Which refrigerants for new supermarkets do we see in 3 to 5 years? Let's go to the same question, but this time then the refrigerants for 3 to 5 years. That question should be on screen in a few seconds. And then let's do the same thing. Hopefully that works to get that new question there as well. That's a
What do you think? What
QR
do you think,
code
John?
here. You probably can scan that QR code, and
Oh, yeah.
maybe we can jump to that same thing that we had before, where you can have to pull and click on that. You have that in the chat box as well, so that you should be able to see that. If you don't see it on the screen, click on the chat box, then that's fine as well. But now it's on the screen. Thank you, Bort. And then let's see what your opinion is, what we see in 3 to 5 years in new supermarkets, which refrigerants.
Jamie, just to answer, I think you were asking me that sort of question.
Yeah, I was going to say, what do you think? So,
I think it very much depends region to region, country to country, application to application. CO2 obviously for the larger
yeah.
supermarkets is taking the lead. I think the semi plug-in type of arrangement. I think it's strange if you go back in history with the supermarkets. When I was much younger, let's say when I started out, everything was a single system with a small unit, whether it was on the top of the deck, underneath, on the roof. It was a typical condensing unit on a display case, or it was an integral. Then we sort of moved away, and at least in the UK, things went to central plant, rack pack, pretty large screw compressors at one time. Then it went to rack and pack, and now we've sort of, things are changing again to semi plug-in and so forth. CO2 definitely, I think, is the future for large supermarkets. I think there's also a huge place for things like R290, keeping things nice and simple. I won't mention the chain of supermarket or convenience store, but a lot of people are going back to integrals with 290 because if you have a failure, you change it out, you put another one in. You don't have to worry about the rack or pack having issues that way. So I think it very much depends on the type of store, the application, and the way people are thinking to do it. So yeah, I think it's very much store dependent, size, number of cabinets, and also the region as well. Obviously with CO2 and being transcritical in very warm climates, things like that.
Yeah, if you had a need for high quality heat reclaim, CO, you have to add all the numbers up because you're just not paying attention to the evaporator. Now you're looking at what do you do with all this energy.
Yes.
Integral R290 makes sense where you can do it legally because here in North America, they're increasing the maximum charge rates for R290, but I don't think we're there yet where you're going to start seeing, above 1 horsepower units running with it. But again, just because of the energy efficiency, you can go to multiple individual integral units or whatever because the efficiency gains are still great enough that you can justify it.
Yep.
So that's interesting.
And that's an interesting discussion, and we can see that the expectation is that CO2 R290 are the majority, with CO2 really a vast majority, and then the medium GWP still a little bit, the old traditional ones nothing, and that shows that there is a change in the market, change of mindset maybe. That's a good segue towards our main topic today, smart stores. When we talk about smart stores, what is a smart store? What's so smart in a store? Why are stores smart? What are your definitions, John and Jamie? If you want to start, John.
That's a good question. But just before I answer that question, Jorg, just to make a point on the refrigerants, and I think we've actually left out something on there that we maybe should have added, and that's the A2L refrigerants.
Yeah.
Because that also, I think, features somewhere, but I don't know where, and it's not in the poll. So maybe if people could, if they have any comment on A2L, is to put that in the chat as well, because we'd be really interested or I would be very interested in that topic also. So that was that. Coming back to your original question, Jorg, what is a smart store? That's a good question. I'd sort of break it into 5 things really, and it could be any one, a few, or all of them. And I guess the first one is some form of electronic control for the refrigeration system on the display cases, on the rack, the pack, but then also taking it to a front end, and that front end doing the monitoring, and then also some form of remote monitoring for that. I think then you could also add into the things like matching your refrigeration load to your actual capacity of your equipment to basically save energy. Thinking about the long-term future of the refrigerant that you put in that store, so you're not having to change the refrigerant every few years as we go along with the legislation changes. Things like heat recovery, Jamie, you mentioned that previously. So I think thinking about heat recovery, do we use that in the store itself for domestic hot water? Do we put that into district heating as they do in the Nordic regions, for example? And then also, I guess, thinking about the power requirement for that store and how you can plan your refrigeration usage to that when electricity is cheaper at a certain time of the day. So do you accumulate cold, for example, in a deep freeze, in the back store, things like that. So I think it's one of many things, but as we've said, it would be really interesting to get the questions on people's opinion of, in their eyes, what is a smart store?
Thanks for your definition of a smart store, John. Jamie, how would you describe a smart store?
Well, I mean, I back up a lot of what John says because it's to me, I'm a refrigerant head guy. I'm more on the refrigeration side as opposed to the control side. The way that my brain works, but communication to a store owner needs to know what his equipment's doing, how it's performing, when it's going to need maintenance, how it can be, how the conditions that are operating now, how they can be improved, things like that. Any time you can get that type of information, you're taking an unknown and you're making it a known. And when you make it a known, then you can do something about it. And generally speaking, that's where you're going to see your energy savings. So, scheduling preventative maintenance, um, having a history of what your box temperatures and things like that were so that you can stay within or prove that you've stayed within the legal requirements for maintaining the cold chain, things like that. Where I find it really exciting is on the adaptive side. Um, John, you mentioned matching your cooling to your load. Um, to me, that's a big part of it because rather than just using a sledgehammer approach where you're turning the system off when you don't need it and you're turning it on when you do need it, and there's no in between, there's no variation. You can match a bit of load here and there, but with the variable speed technology that are coming out today, and the ability to work with humidity control, um, uh, things like that, it makes a big difference in the quality of the product. Because at the end of the day, you're trying to sell product, and the product has to look good. It has to weigh a certain amount to get your money back out of it again. And since the profit margins are so small in the supermarket industry, anytime you can increase your profit by having a better product to sell at the end of the day, that's going to put some money back in your pocket, and that's going to attract people to your store, so to speak. So yeah, that to me, it's on that adaptive refrigeration side where I see a big benefit there.
And thanks, Jamie. And that fits pretty good to a question that came in from Christopher. who asks about, I guess, money as well somehow. So how many cabinets should a store have to make that store interesting for the smart store idea? And in my opinion, that has to do with money, because a smart
Hmm.
store costs more money to install than a non-smart.
Yeah,
You
it's a
you have
higher
to install
installation
some
cost.
stuff.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. How do you see that? How big should a store be to make it usable for smart store ideas?
John, you want to go ahead and I'll back you up on that because I think we're going to see. I think we're going to see the difference in electricity costs here come to the forefront. So, um,
Definitely. I would say my sort of first answer would be I think that's going to be very much a regional discussion as well, because in let's say certain parts of the world, I travel a fair bit, and in the Far East, for example, you might have a very small uh, shop, might have 3 4 display cases, and that's all rigged up to a front end, which is
mhm,
then rigged up to remote monitoring. So I would class that as a smart store. It doesn't
mhm,
have things like heat recovery. Refrigerant is, or long-term refrigerant is not a real sort of issue. They do the refrigerant for the moment, but they do have that smart ability because it is linked to a front end, which then is remote monitored, etc. So I don't know whether cabinets is the right answer. I think it's more to do with the application type of store, chain, what the owner actually wants and what is priority. As you say, Jamie, with electricity, that is a huge cost, and it is a rising cost globally now, the power of the cost of power. So if you can reduce your cost and then get payback on the smart element of the store, then that makes sense. Obviously,
mhm.
the more cases you have, the more power you use, the better the balance is between what you spend and what you get back. So yeah, a little bit of a difficult answer, and I think it's very much location, region dependent, but also type of store, chain, and what their beliefs are.
Yeah, yeah. If they have the larger stores that have multiple locations and they have a corporate side to the store
Mm,
where you have accountants and all those people, that that decision is made in great detail. And a lot of times if you're trying to in our case sell into that market, you've got to convince people that there is definitely a financial benefit. There is a benefit to them in reducing costs elsewhere in their operating costs, where they can get easy access to information. You can provide a service to them through monitoring and things like that takes some of that load off of them internally, right? And so there's all these other things, but at the same time, big companies also have IT departments. And IT departments, their number one rule is you cannot get into our system from the outside unless we want you to. So having remote monitoring and access to outside a lot of times is a challenge for them. Whereas on the smaller store, I like what you said about smart store there, John, is that a smart store to me is a communication side of things and it's a control side of things. And I think there are options out there. We have to be careful with Smart Store that it isn't always going to be a $50,000 investment to get a Smart Store. You can easily get control modules, communication modules, and things like that you can put on individual um, uh, cabinets and things like that, where you can go in with your cell phone and or your tablet and you can dial in and you can download the history on these individual cabinets even without being there, and they're password protected and things like that. To me that's a big deal because I can remember standing in a convenience store and the health and safety inspector for the food industry showed up and basically took an infrared thermometer out and measured all of their case temperatures and everything else that they had there to see that they were in fact, you know, following the rules. Whereas if they had had maybe a history, a document or something like that they could have just showed, Maybe that could have avoided that visit. It could have made it go smoother. I don't know. But that information being readily available to me, to a small store owner where they're being held accountable to, the food and safety guys, to me, that's worth a lot of money, right? And to know that your equipment is working correctly. So you've got to be careful there when you say smart store, because I don't think it always has to be this huge investment where, you're having all these massive controllers and things like that up front. But maybe that's what it is. I don't know.
And yeah, totally agree to that. And John, I mean, somehow you and I had a bit of a contact there. You've been deeper into that, so I leave that to you to talk about that. I guess you know what I mean.
Yes, yeah. It's sort of smart related, and we had a discussion some years ago at a trade show about a global chain that sells coffee. No names to be mentioned. But basically, what they did, this is smart, is that they measured the power consumption of every store, but also the power consumption of every item within that store. So then they got a benchmark of what is normal, and if
Hmm.
anything then went out that benchmark by a percentage, and we didn't get to the percentage discussions, but then it was like, okay, well, that store is using maybe 5%, 10% more on this particular item. So then they dive straight into that and resolve the issue and find out why that particular item is using more
Hmm.
power than the similar
Interesting.
items in all the other stores. So that is, I guess, taking it to the extreme. But if you had a chain of supermarkets, and now we see, again, no names mentioned, but you see a store format from you'll go in one brand of supermarket, and then they'll build another store somewhere else and another store, and the format, the layout is exactly the same. So then you could actually measure store to store to store and see what is going on and why you get the variations. It might be down to the ambient temperature, it might be down to customer demand for the product, but I think that is quite an interesting topic, and I'd class that as being, very smart in how you manage your cost of electricity to the store.
And thanks for mentioning one store would look like the other, because that fits perfect to a question I can see here. Let's see whether we get that on the screen so that everybody can read that. Thanks for that question, because I mean, in new stores you can build one like the other, but
Hmm.
what about existing stores? Can you somehow modify an existing store and rebuild it into a smart store? And if yes, how?
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, to me again, if you're looking at the communication side of things, you can definitely put, a thermostat in there or a controller, a small controller in the cases, and have wireless communication with them, where you can still track that energy usage, and it basically, you can summarize your energy usage over the month, and you can do it case by case. And so if you happen to have something changing in that case, let's say the condenser coil suddenly gets dirty, somebody blocked that coil, they've been stacking boxes, or they've changed what they've put into that case, and suddenly you realize that, hey, we've overloaded this case, now it's no longer maintaining temperature. That kind of information is handy. However, it requires the people that run that operation to actually care and know what to do about that with that information. And I think that's the challenge, is, you know, is this information, this knowledge, worth something to the person running the store? And if it is, then they're going to see value in that. If they really don't care about it, if it's not something that's important to them, or it's not mandated, then they may not see value in that. So it again, I think it's an individual type of thing. Me, I'm a not information person. I would love to know that information, but somebody else, it may not be that far up their up the agenda as far as what's important to them. So I think it's a very personal thing when it comes down to these small types of stores.
Mm.
Mm.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. And just to say, it's interesting in the chat, we've got people from the Middle East, we've got Pakistan. I'm trying to see the other regions as well. So, yeah, be really interested in your thoughts from those regions.
Yeah, and thanks for mentioning that. It's really interesting to see where people come from. So thanks for joining us here. And Jamie, yes, you said some are interested in that, some are not, and I can see there is another question which might fit pretty good to that, and it's a bit of a why, right?
Hmm.
I mean, it starts with a why, and it
Hmm.
could only be the question why. So, but the question is longer, and I like that. So, why should a shop owner, is probably meant here, spend the money to get a smart store when the normal thermostatic cabinets work fine?
Hmm.
Somehow that has been answered, but there are some reasons. But what is it really for the shop owner? What does he get out of that?
Hmm.
Yeah,
I,
John, you want to kick at that?
I was just going to say, I think that sort of comes back to those comments that we said in the beginning about what is a smart store, and I sort of gave those 5 examples of topics, and it depends. I mean, for me, even if you have a case with a TV, if you had some form of comms back to a front
Hmm.
end to remote monitoring, to me that is still a smart store because
Hmm.
you're doing something with the data, you're analyzing the data. Um, if you had a thermostatic valve, you could still have heat recovery. So again, another part of being a smart store. So I don't
Hmm.
think it comes down really to the type of expansion device you use. I think it comes down to what you do with the refrigeration equipment. Do you literally turn it on and let it run? Do you turn it on, monitor it, and be proactive about how it functions and try to get the best use out of it? So I think it's to me it's not about the expansion device. I think it's about what you want to achieve being smart.
Hmm.
And what is the biggest, I guess, issue for the store owner? Is it the cost of electricity? Is it food quality? Is it customer satisfaction? Is it all of those put together? Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
100%. You nailed it on the head right there. You need to be able to break that down to them because most people probably haven't even thought about it. But I can guarantee you they think about their electrical bill when they get it every month. Unless you're gifted to be one of those people where you live where electricity is, 6 cents a kilowatt hour or something like that. But in the places where it's substantially more
Six
expensive than
cents a
that,
kilowatt hour.
you
Don't
know,
mention prices like that to me. That brings me to
I
tears.
know exactly. Well, but exactly, even here in Canada, electricity prices vary wildly between provinces because it all depends on what you were gifted or shafted, as far as what you're generating with. If you're generating electricity with, nuclear power, your price is going to be 3 times what it is if you're using all hydropower, that you put in 50 years ago. So, these are all big differences. But we are looking at introducing smaller individual communication modules, like John mentioned, on these individual little cabinets. And so if you go in there and you talk to an owner, about what's important to them, and that is, being able to have money left over at the end of the month after paying its bills, and you say, look, you know, this can help you break down where your cost is going. This can help you break down where a big
Mm,
chunk of your money is going. And you can see that if there's room for improvement, you can save money. But again, it has to provide that room for improvement as far as, saving money, optimizing things like that. That's the next step that has to be taken too. But for a lot of people, just knowing something, what is going on, why they're paying these bills and what they're getting for it, just knowing that can be valuable to them. It would be to me, right?
Mm.
But again, the cost for these types of installations is a lot lower than what you would normally think for, a normal smart store when you talk about a large supermarket.
Mm.
and then there is another question which fits pretty good to that. I mean, one thing is the other one is an installer. So usually alarms, when we go a bit into the details, alarms go to somebody who takes care about the system. But can shop owners see the alarms as well? I don't know where the direction, where this question goes to. Like, hopefully they cannot, so I can still do my thing, or hopefully the shop owner can see the alarm and he knows what I'm doing as a refrigeration guy. I don't know, but where that goes to. But can they see alarms?
If they're set up for it, they can, yeah.
Mm.
Okay, so
But
as an installer, you can decide whether the shop owner sees the
well,
alarms
I
or
don't know
not.
if it'd be his decision alone, though. I mean, that's something that
Mm.
I'm not involved in on the front end. I do know
Yeah.
that we're working with some supermarkets in the past with controllers and that the there is usually a technical person with that chain, with that supermarket who you're working with, and they're well aware of what you're doing and they understand it. A store owner may not be technical, but he may be the type of person that wants to know what's going on, and so that when the alarm goes off at 3 o'clock in the morning, his cell phone starts buzzing and tells him that cabinet number 17 hasn't been holding temperature or something like that. What he does with that information, I have no idea, but
Mm.
it can be done if you want.
Mm,
Um, just my
Yeah.
observation.
From my history, Jamie, working with our Adapcool products over the years, generally you could set the alarm priority. So it was, again, back in the day, it was 1, 2, or 3, and then depending on the alarm priority, you set what actually happened. So did it
Hmm.
generate a local alarm to the store? Did it only get transmitted to the front end and then the remote side, or did it actually physically do something?
Hmm.
And that way the store dealt with the issues that they could deal with, and the remote part of the monitoring dealt with other issues.
Hmm.
That was the way that I can remember it being done in the past, let's say.
hmm
Hmm.
Thanks for that. And the questions are coming in. I'm just scanning through that a bit, trying to fit them where they fit in the discussion a bit. There is an interesting one about an external influence from carbon credits and
Hmm.
how that affects the store formats and the retrofit. I mean, there is some influence probably from regarding smart stores, because then you might be able to show better that you have saved something. What do you think about this one?
Well, first, a big shout out to my friend Trevor Matthews, who sent this question in. Um, Trevor, I hope things are going well with you. Anyways, um, yeah, you hit the nail on the head when you said depending on the country, and the province or the state that you actually happen to be in. If there is a package that basically will um, allow you to get these carbon credits, will allow you to get some type of financial backing, they certainly will help with the upfront installation costs, which of course then comes back down to the back end, which will make your payback a lot quicker. I do not know, to be honest with you, if we still have the same type of program we used to have back in the 90s where we were going around and doing building audits where they were on the AC side, and where if you went in and you changed your lighting, you put in electronic controls on your AC, you did a bunch of different things, you were you could qualify for some type of cash rebate back from the local government or state government. I'm not aware if there is something currently on the refrigeration side for supermarkets yet. That I'm not 100% aware of. But to me, it would make sense if you can prove that you actually have these, or there's a proven history that we're going to save the energy and it's going to be something that will be a benefit later on to the overall grid. John?
Mm. Yeah, that's a good question. And if I think from the UK point of view, we have something called the Energy Technology List, where basically there is a government-run list, and the most energy efficient products, and it can be refrigeration, pumps, motors, lights, anything that uses power is on the list. And then if you install that in your installation, there is a tax benefit to that. So that's one way of doing it. Regarding sort of carbon credits, I think from a sort of planning point of view and getting planning approval for your store, the more energy efficient it is, then maybe the easier the planning process becomes. So I think there's a lot to do with that. And I agree, it depends whereabouts you are in the world, what current legislation is regarding things like carbon capture and carbon credits and so forth. People talk about, I built this, but then I planted 200 trees, for example. So there's many variants of carbon credits and what it actually means. But I know from the UK, everybody is being pushed to install green, that famous word, green technologies. And if you do, then you get it eases the physical process to
Hmm.
get the approval for the site. So yeah, I
Okay, so
guess
that's just not on the
things are
consumer
moving.
side, then that's actually on the retail side as well. That's
Mm,
interesting.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, yeah.
And energy efficiency is a good point, good segue, because there is a bit of a longer question, and let's see how we can make that a bit shorter on the screen. But let me read that to you, that longer question. What do you think should be the way to prioritize which actions to take in a very basic system? Should we first use floating condensing temperature? Should we use inverter or condenser fans on the compressors? Where do you see the biggest room for improvement? Oh, it fits on the screen as a complete question. Good. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, a couple different
That's
things there. John, do you want to go ahead?
I can give a comment just on that, talking supermarket for a moment. Some years ago, and I wasn't directly involved, but it was again when I was working with Adapcool, a large chain of supermarkets in the UK decided that we should basically visit every site and reset all the parameters to the as it should be to work as efficient as possible. And they saved a large amount of energy just by doing that one thing, because one engineer goes in, he commissions the store, he sets it up, then somebody else comes in, maybe there's an issue, he changes some parameters, oh, it's working better now, I leave it, then somebody else comes in and does the same thing. So all the parameters get changed over the period of time, and it's not as energy efficient as it was in the beginning. So I think that's one comment. And then it's where you start from. So if you have a let's say very basic system, no fan speed control, no suction pressure optimization, no electronic expansion valve, um, then it's the basic things. Is the valve installed correctly? Is the bulb in the right place? Is it insulated? What's the suction pressure? How much superheat have we got?
Yeah,
The sort of real basic things.
yeah.
Um, and then I would say get your head pressure down as low as you can, depending on your type of expansion device, whether you use fan speed control, etc. So, yeah, I think it depends where you actually start from in the beginning. Would be my sort of comment.
Yeah, John, you hit the sweet spot right there because I think if you were to look at the overall market and you look at the condition of a lot of the equipment, including supermarkets and small stores, there is a lot of low-hanging fruit that can be done to reduce not only energy usage, but also prolong the life of the equipment substantially. Reduce warranty costs, reduce service costs. There's all of these things that can be done. So if you happen to have a proper maintenance, a proper ground-based efficiency program where you just go through and fine tune everything to make sure it's working properly, most places are going to see, a savings and possibly a substantial savings just doing that. And then on top of that, yes, there's more low-hanging fruit. Um, Floating head pressure control, great idea. Um, as long as the rest of the equipment is sized properly. If you've got thermostatic expansion valves, can they operate with a lower condensing pressure? A lot of times fan speed controls are set up to operate at a much higher condensing pressure than what's necessary for proper metering device operation. So just going through and fine tuning those, and then having them on top of that, run at a lower condensing pressure during evening hours and things like that. Yes, they can save a lot of money. It doesn't have to be fancy, right? It just has to have somebody knowledgeable go through and make sure everything is sized properly, it's going to work properly. If you change these other parameters to save energy, it's not going to cause more problems than it solves. Then you can, go crazy that way and go forward. As far as variable speed or ECM fans and things like that, I think you're going to see a hodgepodge or a mixture of equipment in most stores, because as you replace old equipment with new, they don't necessarily replace all of them. You're going to have some equipment rating from 25 years ago to some being a couple of years old, and a lot of the condensing units and things like that have been made in the last few years are already going to have ECM motors and variable speed condenser fans and things like that on them. So I don't know if that would be something where I would start off the top doing the fan motors. Maybe as you replace fan motors, or if you're going to do a whole store upgrade, then sure. But I think as John mentioned, there's a lot other things you can look at that are going to save a lot more money and are easier to do than the ECM motors on fans.
And
Yeah.
one of those very easy things to do might be just to clean a condenser, right?
Straighten
No,
the fins
and
out.
and no, but seriously, I mean, maybe, and I would combine that with a question we have here that statement, because in a normal store you might not notice that the condenser is dirty because you don't have anything to compare. You don't get the information. But how is that on a smart store? Maybe some measurements show you, look, with that ambient temperature, that condensing temperature is a bit high, so maybe your condenser is dirty. Maybe you get that information, and that fits pretty good to a question we got, whether a smart store is more environmentally friendly and cost effective as a normal store, normal air conditioned or normally cooled
Mm-hmm.
store. We've been a bit at that, but that really brings it back to the point again.
Mm-hmm.
Does it give you anything?
Do you mind if I take this one, John?
No, go.
All right, somebody's got an ambulance in the back of it, man. I feel like I'm watching a British crime show. Um, this is one of my pet peeves. You go into a supermarket and you wonder, why do they even have coolers in here? This darn store is so cold, you could just hang the meat up in the aisles, right? And just leave the doors open. Like, what's the point, right? Oh, well, we're trying to control humidity in here. Okay, so you're trying to control humidity with the air conditioning. So you set your indoor dry bulb temperature at, what you set it at 12 degrees Celsius or something like that. It's crazy cold. So I think there's a lot of options to save energy by having a smart store being smart on the inside environment where people are actually working and where the inside controls are, so that you can control humidity, so you don't have to worry about condensation on your glass doors, water forming on the floors. You're going to do a lot less defrosting, or have requirement for less defrosting, because you're handling the moisture in the air that surrounds these coolers and these freezers, and it's a lot easier to deal with there than it is inside per se. So I think there's a lot of room to make this smart store jump and make it on the outside of your coolers and freezers, where you're actually controlling the environment everybody works in. And it's not just lighting, the AC and reheat. You can do proper dehumidification. You can have a dehumidification mode in your air conditioning system, so that you're effectively removing moisture, using some of the heat from your condensing units and stuff like that to reheat the air, so that the store doesn't have to be cold, but at the same time it's got an appropriate humidity level. I think there's a lot of room for energy savings here, because I mean, I can't imagine that it's not costing a fortune to cool these stores down the way they are.
No, very true. Very true.
Yeah.
If you go like the Middle East and Far East, you'll see a lot of AC systems in the supermarkets to keep the temperature down. In the
Mm-hmm.
UK, we have lots of display cases with no doors on. So as
Really?
you say, Jamie, you go inside the store, and my wife is always complaining it's very cold in here. You go in the Middle East, Far East, everything has a glass door on for energy
Mm-hmm.
efficiency, and
Mm-hmm.
then they air condition the store.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe from the refrigeration system, maybe from a AC system or splits or whatever. So yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot that can be done to make it cost effective, and we come back to these comments about a smart store being one of those 5 things that I touched on earlier. Things like the heat recovery. That's one part of it. But if you're in a warm climate, like the question came from Mohammed, maybe they need AC in the store. So can you then tap off the fridge system to actually run the AC in the store? Is that more cost effective than having splits everywhere? So yeah, I think there's a lot that can be done for sure.
I mean, that is amazing. So you actually cool the store with the refrigeration equipment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And
Which has lower evaporating temperature. The question is, does that make sense? But yeah, of course.
Yeah. But they've done so many trials to say that if they put glass doors on, then the amount of product they sell falls. Because people don't want to open a door and then look at a product. They want to see the product there, which is
interesting that we had that same discussion. I mean, I'm located in Germany. You probably hear from the accent, and that was the same discussion here. And nowadays, more modern supermarkets, they all have glass doors, and everybody is happy about that. It's even more to the other way around now, that customers say they don't have glass doors. That's far too much energy they spend here in the store. So these opinions can change quite a lot. That's possible as well. Just a short side track. Thanks a lot for to all the comments, to all our listeners here, to all the comments we get, the questions we've had so far. Very interesting comments, like great to hear, thanks for all of that, support your goals, nail hit on the head, and so on. And Nital, thank you so much that you very much like the quality of the Danfoss products. We like to hear that. Thank you.
Yes,
definitely.
Coming back to the smart store, if now you convert a store into a smart store, or you build a new one as a smart store, and Jamie, you have been talking about that. John, you as well. You see quite a lot of stuff. You can monitor stuff, and there's a question who fits quite good to that from an installer perspective. And then the question is, well, will that not generate quite a lot of work for me as an installer when I have to monitor all that all the time?
I don't think it's a matter of monitoring full time. I mean, a lot of smart stores and supermarkets, we do the monitoring. And what happens is when our monitoring department finds an alarm, for example, they will verify what that alarm is. As John says, it's tiered to different levels, and they can actually send it straight out to the service person and notify them and provide all that information to them ahead of time. So it really actually helps in that there's less work for you on the end, because if you get a notification that you have a certain store coming in, rather than going blind, you actually having the underlying information available to you that what needs to be done. And as far as the installation side goes, if it's a small store, a lot of times it's just a wireless module that you're hooking on there. As long as you have the software loaded on your phone or your tablet, it basically is, yes, it needs to be monitored, but a lot of times it runs in the background. You won't even see it until you call it up or you get the alarm.
Agree.
Well, then let's take that as a really good end of that discussion. We are close to 1 hour now. Thanks to all of those who are listening to us, who have been listening to us. Thanks for your comments. Thanks for your questions. For me, it was a pleasure to do this. Thanks, John. Thanks, Jamie, for answering all these questions. And thanks for all the team in the background to help us
Yes, thank you.
to be live here. As a short wrap up, as a short summary, maybe I try to put all that in a few words now. Well, smart, yes, that means you have information to more data than before, and that gets more and more normal. You all have cell phones. Everybody gets used to having more data, and you can do quite some interesting stuff with that information. You can use that to optimize your sale. You can use that to optimize the efficiency of the refrigeration system. You can use that to optimize your service calls so that you don't need to get to every supermarket when you see something is wrong. You might do that from remote.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully that was an interesting discussion for all of you, and thanks for joining. If you have further questions, please continue to send them or contact your local Danfoss guys. They can help you as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.